Hola clase! It's another exciting grammar video with me, Senora Lackey. Today we're going to learn all about possessive adjectives. I have 3 goals for you by the end of this video. Number 1, I want you to know what the possessive adjectives are and which endings to use when. Number 2, I want you to know how to say your. You might think you already know how to say your in Spanish, but it's kind of complicated. And finally, I want you to understand how to use possessive prepositional phrases. This is the alternative that we use in Spanish instead of the apostrophe S. Okay, so let's get started. What are the possessive adjectives? Mi and mis are both ways to say my. Tu and tus mean your. Notice there's no accent mark on this form of tu. Su and sus can mean his, her, or your if you're talking to somebody and treating them as usted. There are 4 different ways to say our: nuestro, nuestra, nuestros, and nuestras. In Spain, another way to say your is vuestro, vuestra, vuestros, and vuestras. These are forms that mean you plural, as in you all. And finally, we have su and sus repeated again. This time they can mean their or your when you're talking to a group of people like ustedes. Well, that chart was nice and pretty, but I think what we really need to do is put these possessive adjectives to work. We need to see when is it that you use mi versus mis. What about nuestro versus nuestra? How do we decide what ending to put on these possessive adjectives? First of all, my dog is mi perro. But what would my cats be? Does the mi stay mi, or does something else happen? That's right, it would be mis gatos. Since gatos is plural, we would use the plural form of mis. So the mi or mis matches the word that comes right after it. Mi perro, but mis gatos. What about your class? This time we're going to talk about the informal your, like we're treating somebody as tu. Muy bien, tu clase. But what if we made it plural and said your classes? Would something have to change with the word tu? I think you're starting to see the pattern here. Tu clase, but tus clases. The S on the end is because clases is plural. What about our next example, his brother? Excelente, su hermano. Su hermano's his brother. What if I change it to his siblings? Wait, do you know the word for siblings? Oh, that's right, just make brother plural. Excelente, sus hermanos. Sus becomes plural because hermanos is plural. It's still his, but we're making it sus because hermanos is plural. The word after it is what determines whether or not we put an S on the end of su. Our next example is our grandma. Let's say that the people who are talking about this grandma are 2 girls talking about our grandma. I hope you didn't get fooled by the fact that I said it was 2 girls. It still would be nuestra abuela. No matter who is talking about it being their grandma, nuestra abuela is used because abuela is singular and feminine. So we need the singular feminine form of nuestra. Nuestra matches the word that comes after it. What about if we said our parents? This time we would need the plural form of nuestros. That's because padres is plural. Nuestros padres. Next example, their house. Their house would be su casa. Even if a lot of people own that house, it's still su casa because casa is singular. So su is singular also. Our final example, their cousins. Muy bien, sus primos. Because primos is plural, we would use the plural form sus to talk about their cousins. Whoa. Back up a minute. Let's make sure that you really understood that last point, because it's an important one. Su casa equals their house. You might be a little confused by that, thinking, wait, their house? That's like a lot of people who own that house. How can it be su and not sus? And the answer, of course, is that the possessive adjective su matches the word that comes right after it. That's the noun it's modifying. It doesn't matter who owns the house, it matters that it's one house. Su casa. Another point that might be confusing you is the idea that su casa means their house. I thought that su casa meant your house. There's that famous saying, mi casa es su casa. Doesn't that mean my house is your house? Wouldn't you say mi casa es tu casa? The truth is, you can say mi casa es tu casa, mi casa es tu casa, or even mi casa es vuestra casa. There's multiple ways in Spanish to say you, so let's make sure we go over these pretty closely and understand the differences. I'm going to show you the way to say you on the left, and then the possessive adjective that would go with it. So let's go through first the 4 different ways to say you. There's tu, which means the kind of you that you would call somebody who you call by their first name, someone you're friends with or that you're familiar with. This kind of tu, the subject pronoun, has an accent mark on it. That's so you can tell it apart from the tu that means your. The next way to say you is usted. Usted is the kind of you that you would use with someone that you would call Mr. or Mrs., that you wouldn't treat with their first name. So, for example, the principal of your school, or your teacher, or your friend's mom. That would be usted instead of tu. It shows a greater level of formality. Next is ustedes. Ustedes, just like it looks, is the plural form of usted. So it's what you would use if we were saying you all, like a group of people. Hey, you all. Hey, ustedes. And finally, there's vosotros. Vosotros also means you all, just like ustedes. Vosotros is used in Spain, and it's used like the plural of tu. So when you're saying you all to a group of your friends or people you would treat with their first name, you would use vosotros. And in Spain, if you were talking to all of your teachers together, you would call them ustedes, you all. It would show more formality or more respect. So in Spain, they differentiate between a formal you all, ustedes, and an informal you all, vosotros. But the rest of Latin America just uses ustedes in any case where it's a plural you all. Now on to the possessive adjectives. The way that you would say your to go with someone that you treat as tu would be tu or tus. Su or sus can mean your if you're referring to something that belongs to usted. And su and sus can also mean the kind of your, meaning that it belongs to you all. Finally, if you're in Spain and you're talking about something that belongs to you all, and it's an informal group, a group of people you would treat with their first names, you can use vuestro, vuestra, vuestros, and vuestras. Just like nuestro, these match not only in number, but also in gender, so you may have to add an S or an A, depending on the word that comes right after it. Let's see some examples to make sure that we know when to use which kind of your. On your quiz, we're going to make it clear who you're talking to. So all of these examples are going to have your, but it depends on who you're addressing, whether you use tu, tus, sus, sus, vuestro, vuestra, vuestros, or vuestras. If I'm talking to my friend Pedro and I say, Pedro, where are your keys? What kind of you, or your, would you use to say your keys in this example? That's right. Since Pedro's my friend, I'm going to treat him like tu. ¿Dónde están tus llaves? Tus becomes plural because llaves is plural. What about if I wasn't talking just to Pedro, but I was talking to Pedro and his friend Marcos? Pedro and Marcos, where is your mom? Oh, wait, it's not his friend, it's his brother. Where is your mom? What form of your would I use here? I hope you looked at Pedro and Marcos and thought, oh, that's going to be plural, like saying ustedes, so ¿dónde está su mamá? Su would be used because we're talking about ustedes. But what about if you were in Spain? That's right. You could also say this phrase as ¿Dónde está vuestra mamá? And vuestra here would be used to say you all's mom, if you were in Spain. Okay, last example of your. What if I'm talking to somebody I would call Señor Gomez? And I say, Señor Gomez, where is your daughter? What kind of your would I use if I'm addressing Señor Gomez? This would be su again. Señor Gomez, ¿dónde está su hija? Because su is also used for usted, and Mr. Gomez is an usted to me because I call him Mr. Gomez instead of Francisco or whatever his first name is. We have reached our third and final goal, to understand possessive prepositional phrases. Huh? What's that? Let me just make one point really clear for you today. There is no apostrophe S in Spanish. You'll never use an apostrophe S for any reason. That doesn't mean that you're just supposed to leave out the apostrophe, though. You can't say, voy a mi abuelo's casa. It doesn't make any sense in Spanish. It's not the way they say it. Instead, you have to use what's called a prepositional phrase. It just means a group of words that starts with a preposition. In this case, your preposition is going to be the word de. De means of or from. So if you say, voy a la casa de mi abuela, you're saying, I'm going to the house of my grandmother. Sounds a little formal in English, but it's the way you have to say it in Spanish since you can't use an apostrophe S. So quiz yourself to see if you understand this concept. How would you say, my dad's car? If you said, el coche de mi padre, you were right. What about our cousin's school? Oh no, on this answer I said la casa instead of la escuela. It would be la escuela de nuestro primo. Since we don't know by the words our cousin if the cousin's male or female, we could also say la escuela de nuestra prima. All right, what about his brother-in-law's store? La tienda de su cuñado. La tienda de su cuñado. Okay, we've reached the summary. Did you get it? Do you understand that me, tu, su, and nuestro are called possessive adjectives, and they help demonstrate to whom stuff belongs or relationships between people? Do you know to make those possessive adjectives plural by adding an S and or feminine for nuestro and vuestro if the word after them is plural and or feminine? In other words, they match the word that comes after them. Do you understand the difference between all the different ways to say your, tu, tus, sus, vuestro, vuestra, vuestros, vuestras, and that it depends on your relationship with the person you're treating as you, whether it's a formal relationship or informal relationship, and also whether or not you're in Spain. Finally, are you really clear that instead of mi amigo's casa, you're supposed to say la casa de mi amigo? If you get all 4 points of this, then you understand everything you need to know about using possessive adjectives. Alright, so that's it. The next time that you're speaking in Spanish or writing something in Spanish, be sure to use your possessive adjectives correctly and think about your endings. Also, when you're reading something or listening to something or watching a video in Spanish, if you hear the possessive adjectives used, you'll definitely know what they mean. Buena suerte!